were going to set apartheid South Africa ablaze so we could build something new.
There are many people who feel that it is useless and futile for us to continue talking peace and non-violence.
A spring dawn breaks over a house of history, a crucible of the struggle, a house of secrets that made headlines around the world, a safe house where security was slack, a comfortable home where an uncomfortable journey began, a journey that very nearly led to the gallows, but instead led to liberation.
This was a place where dedicated, committed people came together to plan how we would get there. We might have made mistakes, we might have been careless, but it's that vision that we had that we can, out of what we've got, create a different society for all our people.
This is the story of Liliesleaf, a house tucked away in the quiet suburb of Rivonia in Johannesburg. Enthusiasts have turned it into an historical site in honour of one of South Africa's most compelling stories. In 1961, activists bought it as a safe house for people living underground, a base for both the Communist Party and the African National Congress. It was a time when black South Africans were relegated to the fringes of society. Liliesleaf was the home of the Goldreich family, who played the front of wealthy white farm owners, where powerful political leaders, including Nelson Mandela, posed as farm workers. While Mandela was hiding at Liliesleaf, he carried out this underground interview to tell the world activists were ready to take up arms.
I think the time has come for us to consider whether the methods which we have applied so far are adequate.
It was here that many of these decisions were made. It was also here that police raided and arrested the political leadership of the South African underground. It led to the trial and incarceration of Nelson Mandela. He emerged nearly 30 years later to lead his country to democracy. These are many of the untold stories gathered before they fade.
Liliesleaf, Rivonia, came to symbolize this switch from mass struggle to the underground, from open campaigns to armed struggle.
Every morning, just after dawn, Mo Morongwa makes her way through Rivonia to Liliesleaf. 20 years ago, she would have needed a pass and a letter from her employer to make this walk. In apartheid days, police could have arrested her for merely being in a whites-only area. Mo Morongwa started here as a cleaner and has worked her way up to be personal assistant to the chief executive officer.
I think we actually have achieved a lot, and there's no racism anymore. We all won, and I really appreciate that from our government. We never feel exploited by anyone. You can walk into a mall and you can feel free to do whatever you want.
Another early bird is Jacqueline Otukile. She is the tour guide at Liliesleaf who shepherds hundreds of visitors a year around this site.
I feel great. Even every time when I wake up, I'm going to work. Let me just go and do my job for a day and see how many people are coming in. And then I'm enjoying it. I'm really very, very proud of it, because I mean to work here in such a history, it makes me feel like, like I'm working like in the parliament, or maybe I've been seen every day, but it's very, very important for me to work here.
Thank you for calling Liliesleaf by the speaker.
As the office opens up, the boss is on his way in.
Each day brings a different challenge, a new excitement, and to some extent, a different problem.
Nick Walpe is a man who campaigned for Liliesleaf to be transformed from a guest house forgotten in the suburbs into an historical site. He is also the son of the man who oversaw the purchase of Liliesleaf as a safe haven for activists nearly half a century ago. Harold Walpe, activist, lawyer and exile.
It was almost as if the word reluctant revolutionary comes to the fore. Because even with his own family, he was extremely secretive and would never reveal or engage in any discussions. And I remember I used to snoop around his desk, which used to infuriate him. And when we used to ask him and say the phone was tapped, he would say, the best word I could describe is humbug. As if, why would they bother tapping me? It's a waste of time. I have nothing of interest or importance to say. And that's what he would say when I would ask him about, isn't he worried about being assassinated? And his comment was, why would they waste buying a bullet on me?
When Liliesleaf launched in May 2008, the great and the good were there. Veterans of the struggle, including the then future head of state, Jacob Zuma.
On a winter's morning in July 1963, the apartheid police descended on these premises, determined to crush forever the struggle of a nation that was struggling to be free. Today, 45 years ago, 45 years later, we can declare proudly and without fear of contradiction that they failed.
It was a day of celebration and memories. But in the many difficult months since this joyful beginning, a dark cloud has formed over Liliesleaf.
We didn't expect a flood of visitors, but we thought that within a few months of opening the doors, we would have a steady stream of visitors, and that didn't materialize in the first year, and it hasn't really materialized at the moment in the second year. And we've now, in hindsight, recognized that to get a historical site off the ground requires literally that old British saying, backs to the wall, bulldog mentality, we'll fight them on the beaches, we'll never surrender.
Okay, this is the rural area of Rivonia, how it looks like during that time.
It's mind-boggling that that people don't actually come through and look at probably the birth of our democracy.
This is where Mandela was doing a target practice near this veranda, and he shot a bird on this tree.
Once, Liliesleaf was a haven for political fugitives. Now it is a draw for visitors and corporate conference clients, like these auditors from a Johannesburg partnership. Jacqueline Otukili knows Liliesleaf and its story like the back of her hand. She's spent years working here, first as a housekeeper in the days when Liliesleaf was a guest house. She then trained as a guide and takes these auditors through a story that unfolded before they were born.
I think for me it's been a very moving experience, considering the fact that I knew a lot about the history around the Rivonia trial. But to actually be here and be at the place where our great leaders put their minds together to give us this freedom in this country. And this is obviously well before I was born, but I think it's, at the moment I feel very emotional.
I don't know where she is.
This is the room that everyone wants to see.
And then this is Mandela's room here. This is where he was staying. You go into Mandela's room and said, this is where Mandela was staying. Said, how? In this just such a small room like this. I mean, this man, he's a hero.
In 2005, when Nelson came here, and we were talking to him about what makes Liliesleaf significant, he said it's not so much the activity, it was the fact that Liliesleaf was a place of intellectual, ideological, strategic, military discourse and engagement. It was a place of dialogue,
It was a place of debate and engagement. And he said that is what really underpinned the significance of this place.
Gives you on the safe path, the one path.
If you want one thing, you stick to it.
Resilience, commitment to the cause.
It's only when you actually come into a situation like this where you're able to actually experience what people of the past or great leaders have done, that you're actually able to understand it. It humbles you because in doing this sort of type of thing, you realize the selflessness and the sacrifices that people like Nelson Mandela were able to make.
And this tree here, they tried to jump out of this window, but because the police, they surrounded the whole place, they were arrested before they couldn't go far.
I think my generation is actually quite shielded from this. You know, we hear stories from our parents telling us about how they had to endure those circumstances of, going to certain beaches, sitting on certain benches, not being allowed into certain areas. And I don't think we fully understand that, the younger generation. But being here at Liliesleaf, you get an idea of the significance and the enduring times that they had to go through.
Apartheid was an evil system that probably was cultivated on another planet.
Another visitor to Liliesleaf in this year would agree from the bottom of his heart. For Paul Goldreich, the youngest of the Goldreich children, this was the end of a 6,000-mile trip, a return to his childhood home in the country of his birth, a house he hasn't seen since he was 5 years old, a country that has changed beyond all recognition.
It feels that people are, they really have a sense of confidence about themselves. They don't feel oppressed in that kind of way. And that's a phenomenal thing. It's a great thing. Whatever's going on in the country, whatever the difficulties that emerge in this country and, the struggles that people have in this post-apartheid era, I think it seems as though there's a lot of strong feeling. When I was unwell.
This is also a journey to confront his demons.
It's a very emotional experience. And although the house, in many ways, has changed an enormous amount, it still retains a lot of the elements that I can remember about it. And I can remember a hell of a lot about this place. And I actually remember...
What he remembers most is pain. To him, this is the scene of a crime that robbed him of his childhood innocence.
It's, of course, a lot smaller than I remember it to be.
It took Paul Goldreich a mere 10 hours on a plane from London to step back in time nearly half a century to his tender years.
What was going on in the mind of that little boy? I mean, he was a very active, he had a very fertile and very active imagination, that boy.
They call him the boy at the window. In the wake of the raid on Rivonia on July the 11th, 1963, the police took this formal photograph to use as evidence. The police photographer didn't notice young Paul Goldreich.
Okay, my parents' bedroom. During the raid, when they were being interrogated, the curtains were drawn, but I saw a chink in the curtain, so I came here and I was pointing through the window. I was then told to go, very, very sternly and very abruptly. But I did try during that process to find other ways in, but I couldn't get in. I wanted to know what was going on inside that room. I was desperate to know.
This was Paul Goldreich's first visit to his former home at Liliesleaf since that day more than 46 years before. It is an uneasy return.
There's a lot of pain. There's a lot of pain because the experience of the police raid and the final day, 2 days, is very poignant and at the front of my mind, really. So there's that. That particular event saw the breakup of my family, as it was, and of course that's very, very sad.
The last time he was here, his parents were being driven away in a police van, and he was being hustled off to uncertainty. There is a memory on almost every wall.
What struck me when I first came in here was my father's face in that photograph. I mean, he's, he clearly knows that this is it, really. He's looking very, very worried. We go into my bedroom. Yeah, this brings back a lot of memories, this room. I remember I used to stand here looking out a lot of the time when I was, unwell, and I had a kidney infection when I was about 5, and I used to, I used to stay in the room quite a lot.
Another wall, another memory. Words to his father from the head of State Security, General Hendrik van den Berg. Among the very words he was straining to hear at his parents' window more than 46 years ago.
Yeah, so this is van den Berg's quote. I want to tell you what's going to happen to your children. This is what he says to my father. In that voice like a ghost is talking, and he told me that the children were going to be moved from here and put into an asylum, and the person who was responsible for it was me. Well, this is a very, very harrowing quote, and actually the police told me that they would be doing terrible things to my parents if I didn't tell them what I knew. So it's a very, very scary quote, that one.
The Goldreich family was at the heart of the Liliesleaf story. In August 1961, the South African Communist Party bought the then isolated farm for use as a safe house for activists and underground work. Then, Rivonia was a whites-only suburb, and Arthur and Hazel Goldreich posed as members of the affluent hunting, shooting and fishing set to allay suspicion.
When Arthur used to walk around in jodhpurs and riding gloves, horse riding gloves, playing this role. But they were sitting on a keg of dynamite. They could put them in prison forever and ruin their kids' lives as well.
That dynamite was yet to go off. On the surface, all was lovely in the garden. The Goldreichs paid 100 rand a month rent for the run of green fields as far as the eye could see. For Paul Goldreich, it paved the way to a golden early childhood.
My brother and I spent a lot of time just playing in this kind of area outside the house. We had 24-acre garden. Huge areas of open land that we could investigate.
The idea was to fool the police by pretending Liliesleaf, then surrounded by open fields, was operating as a farm. Thomas Mashifane, an old Communist Party member, set himself up as a foreman and brought in a crew of young men to work the land and grow vegetables.
I don't even think they knew about Mandela. They were young, but not too young where we could be guilty of exploitation of children. They were sort of old enough to work on the farm, and they worked on the farm with Thomas's foreman. And Thomas used to go on his bicycle and sell the products. And the best customer, the Rivonia police.
Mami, Daddy!
Na endlich. Wir haben uns schon Sorgen gemacht.
Tja, ich hatte noch viel zu erledigen.
Wir können dann gleich mit der Besprechung.
If the police had gone to buy vegetables at Liliesleaf, they could have found a who's who of the South African underground movement. Many dressed in blue overalls and pretending to be workers. all needed somewhere to hide. Many were members of the ANC, offered the safe house by the Communist Party. The party had been banned in 1960 in the wake of Sharpeville. A number of frequent visitors were among the high command of Umkhonto we Sizwe, the military wing of the party. First and foremost, the most wanted man in South Africa, the so-called Black Pimpernel, Nelson Mandela, a prominent lawyer and son of a chief. Walter Sisulu, the intellectual rock of the movement with a razor-sharp mind. Dennis Goldberg, a road engineer turned bomb maker, the technical officer for the High Command for Umkhonto we Sizwe in the Western Cape. Govan Mbeki, an intellectual and tough disciplinarian who'd been in politics for nearly 40 years and had risen to be the national chairman of the African National Congress. Ahmed Kathrada, a veteran activist and son of a shopkeeper from the small town of Schweitzer Reinecke near the Botswana border, he was one of the great organisers of the struggle. Lionel Rusty Bernstein, a long-time activist and member of the Communist Party. Raymond Mhlaba, an anti-apartheid activist with a trade union background. He had been to China for weapons training. Elias Motsoaledi, a Communist Party activist. Andrew Langeli, a member of Umkhonto we Sizwe High Command and a feisty activist in his home of Soweto. He also went to China for military training. James Cantor, a debonair lawyer and one of Mandela's court colleagues. Most agree he was arrested merely by dint of being Harold Wolper's brother-in-law and paid by going to an early grave. Almost all were to pay with their freedom for their links with Liliesleaf and the struggle. Ahmed Kathrada is one of the survivors. He is long retired, and the Nelson Mandela Foundation in Johannesburg is just one of the many organisations to which he lends his support.
The last criminals.
It's a very nice photo.
It's lovely, huh? Remember when they did this?
No, he was trying to escape, to remind me that I was in the photo, and I said I couldn't be because I left.
You left?
Then he said, no, I left after the photo.
Exactly.
That's he reminded me.
But you look like the most criminal of all of them. Look with those dark glasses on.
There are 4 Rivonia survivors, and this is a rare picture of them reunited. Ahmed Kathrada has to pen his signature for posterity.
40-odd years.
Yeah.
What do you think?
Well, we see the 4 of us, but we think more of those who are not with us. Walter Sisulu, Govan Mbeki, Elias Motsoaledi, Raymond Mhlaba.
It's more than 20 years since the authorities released Kathy, as he is known, from Robben Island. He was in prison for 26 years after conviction in the Rivonia trial. When he came out, everything from motorways to computers were a mystery he had to learn from scratch.
It took some time. I first tried to learn 2 weeks after I tried to learn, when I had to speak at this huge rally, welcome rally. So I watched a friend of mine doing it. I could type as a child, so I messed around a bit.
Even an ATM cash machine held terrors for a man excluded from society for more than a quarter of a century.
A friend of mine, Lalu Chiba, who served 18 years, he was released before me, but for the years that he was released before me, he never tried anything. So one morning, after our walk, we decided to draw some money. So I put in the card, and it was swallowed. So he put in his card, and it was swallowed. And then the next day I had to leave overseas. So they had to get in an engineer to retrieve our cards.
Dennis is the baby, hey? Dennis is the baby.
Dennis is the baby.
Not 80 yet.
No.
The baby of the Rivonia Triallists is merely in his mid-70s. Dennis Goldberg spent a lifetime in prison and exile in Britain. Now he is back in South Africa to share the wisdom of his remarkable life.
The government who did this, and why do they keep on?
This is a talk at the Apartheid Museum to a group of visitors from the United States. They want to know about the struggle, and Dennis leaves them in no doubt about the day that prepared him to lay down his life. March the 21st, 1960, the day of protest against the past laws that meant every African had to carry an identity card, the infamous Sharpeville massacre.
In 1960, people handed in their passes. The police opened fire. They said they'd been shot at. They were afraid of being overrun. It wasn't true. 69 people were shot dead. Over 200 were wounded. Everyone shot in the back as they tried to get away. South Africa erupted. A state of emergency was called. State of emergency is like martial law throughout the country. At least 20,000 people were arrested. I was.
The fourth surviving Rivonia Triallist is still campaigning for his people in Soweto, the very place where it all began a lifetime ago. Andrew Mangeni is a Member of Parliament in the South African government at a time of life when many have retired. At the age of 84, after spending more than a quarter of his life in prison, he's opened up a new constituency office in Diepkloof.
This is where we listen to people and help people from all political persuasions, not only ANC people, but anybody who falls under constituency. If they have any problems, they come here.
Andrew Mlangeni is a man close to his roots. He lives in the same house he has lived in since the 1950s. The house where police arrested him in 1963 in a township where his politics were forged. One of his early comrades was the young Nelson Mandela.
Madiba's greatest qualities are his love for people, his love for freedom, his love for the liberation of this country, so that everybody should be equal, everybody should have equal opportunities and peace.
Many of these political careers in the turbulent 1960s led underground into the safe house at Liliesleaf, where sanctuary and danger awaited them. In August 1961, Liliesleaf was set up to shelter the underground. After the ANC was banned in 1960, it was one of the few places where activists could hide. One of the first to arrive was Nelson Mandela in October 1961. He had been underground for many months and had to pose as a gardener to keep up the facade. He chose the name David Mutsumai, the name of one of his legal clients. To the young Paul Goldreich, he was merely David, a friend and playmate.
Madiba used to call me the naughty boy. And our maid, Enid, she was terrified of snakes. And we used to wander around the fields collecting snake skin. And we'd run or we'd hide it under her pillow, so at night she'd freak out. How many kids, grow up in an environment where there are guards wandering around and they're supposed to be workers on a farm? How is that supposed to work? How is it supposed to work that your father disappears or goes to China for a period of time to learn how to blow things up and then comes back and tells you that he can blow pylons up?
In among the danger of rubbing shoulders with wanted men, there were golden days with Madiba.
I remember walks with him. I remember going down to the river, shooting snakes with him. There's the famous story about him shooting the bird. We did a lot of shooting. I mean, when you think about the craziness of that, what is this guy who's not supposed to be Madiba doing, wandering around with these kids shooting things? It's a bizarre idea, isn't it? We weren't supposed to know who he was.
Terry Hepker, now in his 50s, was a playmate of the Goldreichs in the 1960s. This is his return with his sister and daughter for the first time since 1963. He recalls happy days with Madiba.
One day when we went down to the bottom corner of the river, there was a wall there. And that's when I remember also pictures of Nelson Mandela when he was a lot younger. That's how I knew him. He had his big overall on and he was a giant. And he stood with a rifle and he said, "Move away. It's dangerous here. Go home."
Madiba's room. We spent time here. I was telling you earlier about this anecdote when Madiba threw the knife and hit the snake. As I remember it, the snake was going up the door frame, and he picked up the knife and he threw the knife and hit the snake.
Evelyn!
Du bist schon zurück? Ist irgendwas
Komm, lies das mal.
But as the Goldreich family settled into Liliesleaf, the underground movement there was gathering pace.
The leadership structure was outside the country, with Oliver Tambo and Yusuf Dawda and those steps. Joe Slovo was out. So the high command became, or arrogated to itself, being the ANC leadership, and the MK leadership, and the trade union leadership, just a handful of chaps. So we had a lot of administrative work to do. There I was quite a bit involved in there because I could type, I could ronio and produce things. So we kept ourselves busy with administrative work, keeping in touch with underground units in other provinces and so forth, helping to arrange for people to leave the country and so forth. And of course, locally, helping to arrange meetings with people who are not underground, who are functioning in the country illegally.
Dennis Goldberg became a familiar face at Liliesleaf in 1963 after he was forced to leave his home in Cape Town, where he was carrying out sabotage to go underground in Johannesburg.
I can tell you, when I was there, that's 6 weeks between arriving in Joburg and getting arrested. Man, I was invincible. We were going to take them on. We were going to work their case, really. It was such a high-pressured, exciting time. People were reading, people were writing. And we know that when Nelson Mandela was underground, he read voraciously and he made detailed notes and copied out huge chunks from books. It was found there, so that's the proof. It became a study centre. Kathrada talks about having written pamphlets and reproduced pamphlets. There were no photocopiers then. You use an old cyclostyle machine, Gestetner copiers and Rivonia and so on. And it was important underground work. Politics is not always just making speeches, you know.
One of the things in the background proved sharp and painful.
There were geese there, and you know, geese are wonderful watchdogs. I used to arrive there and get out of the vehicle I was driving, and the geese would attack me. But I'm a city boy. I mean, I was terrified of the geese, really and truly. I don't know what it would have done if an armed man had stood up, but the geese frightened me, and I would have to drive them off so I could get into the house.
Many of the activists moving in and out of Liliesleaf were high on the wanted list and had to wear a disguise to evade the police.
I met Kathrada there, and it was very funny. I looked at him. I thought, this is a familiar person, but Kathrada's got black hair, and this is pinkish hair, because he'd used hydrogen peroxide, and his hair turned out with this blonde with a pink blush.
The reason, one of the most talked about disguises in South African history.
Arthur Goldreich took a plaster of Paris, this thing of my face, And he worked on that to change my disguise and then glasses and so forth.
The plan was to turn Ahmed Kathrada into a Portuguese man named Pedro.
I see it all the time because you open a book and it's there. I've just come back from America last week and it was there as well. I laughed like everybody else laughed because it looks terrible. You see, it's not like Governor Mbeki and them who were disguised in overalls, you know. The rest of it was the same. Walter, of course, had a little moustache and Governor Mbeki's hair was dyed.
Keeping up the pretense could often be painful for young idealists.
Once I went to fetch a battery to take from the generator set to go and pump water for our house. And Governor Mbeki in his blue overall and balaclava hat said, "No, comrade, you can't push the wheelbarrow. It looks absurd if the white boss is pushing the wheelbarrow and his labourers walking next to him." And there was Govan, much older than me, with high blood pressure, and I've got to let him push the wheelbarrow. Because we had to make the cover. And for me it was such a disrespect for such a great leader. There was a small holding being used as it should be used, as a farm. That it was being used as a cover for something else was known to the young Goldreich children because they were intelligent and they could see things weren't normal. But it's what you have to do. I mean, you couldn't set up a military base in the midst of Rivonia and say, "Here we are, come and take us."
As the underground movement went about its business, the happy days for the Goldreich children were fading and the strain was taking its toll.
From the experience of being a child of people who were involved in armed struggle, living in a completely secretive world, and it was totally secret. We were not supposed to know who, for example, who Madiba was. We didn't know what our parents were doing, although clearly there were signs and signals that there were unusual things going on. You don't live on a farm with guards and with 22 guard dogs and people coming and going and people moving around in the middle of the night without getting some sense of something being untoward. And the additional thing in relation to the secretiveness was not being able to tell anybody about anything that you experienced. So what happens psychologically is that one holds on to a very deep split in oneself. Part of you is desperate to know what's going on. Another part of you knows that you can't know.
In the confusion, the Goldreich children, who were playing with one of Mandela's sons, pointed out Mandela's photograph in a magazine, blowing his fragile cover.
We outed him.
Not intentionally.
Not intentionally. But I mean, how can you live in this environment and not, not identify people? It's just crazy. I think this was part of the other aspect of it. It was crazy for these grown-ups to assume that these children did not have minds. I mean, that was the other bit, that the children would not see anything, hear anything, think about what was going on, or talk about what was going on, or want to talk about what was going on. It was a bizarre idea.
It was a tiny chip at the fragile security of Liliesleaf as it struggled on with pretending to be a farm.
Governor Mbeki used to sell us chickens that we had at Liliesleaf. So he was a very strong disciplinarian, very hard. That we are underground and we must live. We said no, we are underground. That's Wilton and Coy and myself. We are underground, but for heaven's sake, we are not going to last forever. We are going to be arrested sooner or later. Nobody can go underground and think he's going to remain underground for years and years.
Das müssen wir eben organisieren.
These prove prophetic words as times were about to get a lot tougher for the underground activists of Liliesleaf. Life was about to get rough for those at Liliesleaf. The movement was becoming bolder and the authorities were closing in. Apart from that, little had changed in an increasingly prosperous South Africa, which wanted to hang on to the status quo. Pick Botha rose through the ranks of the apartheid government to become its foreign minister in the late 1970s.
As Mr. Mandela said, why could you not have reached out? That we didn't do. We wanted to establish white rule and made it a fortress that could not be taken. And unfortunately, that fortress had to be broken down. And that took, unfortunately, a long time, but thank God, it did in the end happen.
One of the young bloods who was deciding that breaking down the fortress was the only way was lawyer Nelson Mandela. One of his early partners in the struggle was Andrew Langeni. Their first meeting was a short walk from where he collects his letters at Dubai Post Office.
I first met Madiba in 1951. I was already working and married. And I was waiting there for the train with a friend of mine, Simon Malaza, the late Simon Malaza. And then here comes this tall young man. And as he was passing us, he was going to the second class coach. We traveled in the third class ourselves. Here's this tall young man. Simon stopped him. Madiba. When he stopped, he's hello. He's that type of a man. He speaks loud, even when he was one of the few people in Soweto who had telephones. And for example, when he answers the phone, he says, hello, how are you, man? Hey! He speaks very loud. If you are passing in the street, you could hear that somebody is talking in the house.
According to Mlangeni, Madiba took time to find his feet in the movement.
It was not easy to approach Madiba. Unlike Sisulu, very approachable. A man of the people, a man on the ground, you know.
In 1961, Mandela was a troubled man. He was faced with a decision that would endanger lives and change the course of history.
It's a beautiful day. Come on, Maxie. I can't believe that.
Anne-Marie Wolpe, the widow of activist Harold Wolpe, spent a lifetime in exile before retiring in Cape Town. She remembers a poignant moment in 1961 as she left a party.
Nelson and I walked out together. And as we were walking out, he said, oh, my heart is very heavy now. We have decided we cannot do passive resistance. We cannot maintain this type of confrontation with the government. We've decided to go into armed struggle. It was sadness, real sadness, because it was an immense decision to arrived at.
We were very angry. Some of us here in Soweto, people who were in the ANC, they said, what does Mandela mean the old chapters closed? What does he mean that the ANC must now take up arms? You must remember the time ANC had been a non-violent organization.
Not everybody was keen on taking up arms at the stage we did. The executive of the ANC in Natal were very reluctant. They felt we hadn't exhausted political arguments.
Madiba then went to Stenga to convince the chief about taking up arms. Well, the chief was a bit skeptical at the beginning. He's himself a non-violent man by nature.
Liliesleaf is
Mandela, who was still on the run, also decided to hint at the armed struggle using the relatively new media of television. Veteran British television journalist Brian Widlake was just 30 and 9 months into his broadcasting career when he began reporting from South Africa in 1961. One morning he was recovering from the frustration of an arrest by the police when a fellow journalist offered him the scoop of a lifetime.
Patrick O'Donovan, who was working for The Observer, sat down beside me and said, "You had a bad time." I said, "Yeah, I'm very angry." He said, "Would you like to meet the Admiral?" And I thought, this has got to be a code name. And obviously it was Mandela. So I said, naturally. That evening, we did a lot of fiddling around because my phone was being tapped. Every time I stepped out into the street, there were spooks on my trail. Yeah, they're very easy to see. All square heads, all square trilbies. You couldn't miss them. And big boots. And but anyway, they were following around the place. So I was very cautious. And it was arranged for 2 a.m. in the morning. And Kathy Kotrada took me there by car. And I didn't know the way. And it transpired that he didn't know the way either, and he'd lost his way. We're going round and round in circles and dodging down here. And I thought, basically speaking, he was avoiding the security police, you see, so I was very happy with that. But he was trying to get his bearings. Anyway, we eventually arrived there. We blacked out the place and all that, and we just waited till 2 o'clock. And then the great man came in, sat down, and we started. No preliminaries, nothing like how's our children, how's Winnie or anything like that. There's a seat, he said, right, and away we went.
Now, if Dr. Verwoerd's government doesn't give you the kind of concessions that you want sometime soon, is there any likelihood of violence?
There are many people who feel that the reaction of the government to our stay at home, ordering a general mobilization, arming the white community, arresting 10,000s of Africans, the show of force throughout the country, notwithstanding our clear declaration that this campaign is being run on peaceful and non-violent lines, close the chapter as far as our methods of political struggle are concerned. There are many people who feel that it is useless and futile for us to continue talking peace and non-violence against a government whose reply is only savage attacks on an unarmed and defenseless people. And I think the time has come for us to consider, in the light of our experiences in this stay at home, whether the methods which we have applied so far are adequate.
And that was the story, and he was out as soon as I said thank you very much. He was out through the door and gone in his black leathers. Big man, very imposing, looking not unlike a gangster. Or a terrorist, if you like, or something like that. And he was gone.
Gone, but not forgotten. The underground interview made headlines around the world and galvanized the movement in South Africa.
I asked him what it was that
the military wing of the ANC, Mkhonto weSizwe, the Spear of the Nation, was born.
Die hier hatten Zünder für...
One of the first members was Dennis Goldreich, who started recruiting guerrilla fighters not too far from his retirement home in Hout Bay.
Our young recruits, did they want to fight? Oh, we were going to be, I'm a Johnny. You know, I'm going to be a soldier. I believed we had to take up arms. I didn't need to hear Nelson Mandela say so. I had read history. I knew about the Vietnamese people and the Cubans and the Algerians and the resistance to the Nazis behind the lines in World War II, in Europe, in Italy, in the Far East, of how important small guerrilla forces could be in shaking the very power base of the dominant power.
A major strike was set for December the 16th, Dingaan's Day, an important day in the Afrikaner calendar, the commemoration of the defeat of a Zulu army in 1838, a knife to the heart of the establishment. Lawyer Harold Walpe was helping to plant bombs in Johannesburg.
They had targeted City Hall, as far as I understand, and they were going to go and plant firebombs. And if my memory serves me correctly, apparently they put the bombs into drawers. So my father told me that they had realised afterwards, in order for a firebomb to work, it needed oxygen, so they didn't go off. And of course, 2 of them were arrested. And the 3rd one wasn't. Now, during the court case, the prosecutor apparently had said, if you reveal to us who the 3rd accomplice was, we will be very lenient on you in sentencing. And lo and behold, the 3rd accomplice was actually the defending lawyer, my father. So the prosecutor actually was sitting most probably 10 meters from the 3rd accomplice. He lost the case, but it was quite an irony that the prosecutor was sitting on them revealing who the 3rd one was, and the 3rd one was there in court with them.
Dennis Goldberg was a road engineer, so everyone assumed he could make bombs. They used to call him Mr. Technico.
I made some explosives. They were to go at the back door of the Roland Street back door of the Roland Street prison in the heart of Cape Town, as a symbolic gesture, at a pass office and so on.
This was the target. More than 48 years on, the prison has been transformed into an archive. The attack proved a flop.
One, it took me longer to make the devices than I thought. So the ones for the pass officers didn't get there in time. The one at Roland Street, George Peake placed it. The police were waiting for him. And they switched on their headlights and had him pinned down. He had to beg them to let him take the detonator out. Actually, he was safe because it went off in a policeman's hands 24 hours later. I needed to learn some more technology, you see.
Everyone needed to learn more, and the decision was made by Umkhonto we Sizwe to send recruits overseas for military training. First, they turned to the Soviets.
The Soviet Union said, chaps, we had not been engaged in that type of work for many years, decades. The best country where you should send your people for training is China. First people who went for military training were 6. Raymond Mhlaba, Wilton Mkwai, Joe Gabi, Stephen Naidu, Pat Mtembu, and myself, and trained in Moscow as well. You see, thereafter, when we rejoined the other group, we were trained in how to make bombs and all those things. You see, landmines, those are the type of things in which we were trained. It was expected that when we come back home, there were sort of training officers, so that when we come back home, we train others.
Back at Liliesleaf, the High Command was also preparing for action with a whiff of danger in the air.
We were going to set South Africa, apartheid South Africa, ablaze so we could build something new. So what was it like? Bit cloak and daggerish, but careless as well. As I say, Joe Slovo used to come in his own car, so did Bram Fisher. A lot of people came. And we were arrogant, I think. We assumed that the cops must be stupid. After all, they're just Boere, you know. And that's a dangerous mentality.
And I was very concerned about the complete disregard for security. People coming in and out, ignoring the rules that any new person who had to come there had to get the permission of the Secretariat, whether they were members of the Communist Party or not.
These were cracks that were about to widen into chasms. The days at Liliesleaf were numbered.